Hi everyone, I'm Dom from Solida. This is a shorter video where I cover a nice example of how regular expressions, or Regex for short, can be used in combination with Notion 2.0. The example I'll be looking at today comes from my client database, which I will be releasing soon. I also want to note that this is just one example of how Regex can be used. There are a few more use cases in this template alone, but I wanted to show you something simple just to give you an idea of how it works. For a more in-depth look at Regex, Thomas Frank has a really good resource which I will link in the description below. The challenge I faced was that I wanted to create a unique ID that took into account the name of the database entry, in this case the name of the contact, which is here. But Notion has an ID property already, so let's have a look at that first. So this is the ID property here, and what it does is it generates a random number that is unique for every entry in the database. And that's great, but what it doesn't do is create a unique prefix. So if we go to edit the property here, we see that we can create a prefix. So the one already in here is CON, but that isn't unique to each entry in the database. It would simply be repeated for each database entry with the unique number added on to the end. What I want is a dynamic ID so we can see which contact the ID is related to just based on the content of the ID itself. And the reason why I want an ID in the first place is simple. It's because names aren't always unique. You could easily end up in a situation where you have two John Does and a Jane Doe in your database. So what I want is something that shows part of the first name, the whole of the last name, and then a unique number afterwards. So let's start by creating a new property. And we'll call it contact ID. Remember, the ID will be in three parts: first name, last name, and ID. But to highlight what Regex is versus simply just a simple formula, I'll pull the first name using just a formula and the last name using Regex so you can visually see what the difference is. This also serves as a reminder that just because Regex can do a lot of things, it's not the only way, and it's certainly not always the most simple way, especially if you aren't familiar with it. So the first thing we want to do is pull up the name property. That's what we'll be referencing to create our ID. So as you can see, it currently says Dom Spanos. What we want to do now is apply the substring function. And as you can see from the description here, what it does is it returns the substring based on the index numbers you pass to it. So that is how many characters from the start and then to the end it's supposed to be looking at. So in this case, the substring is Notion, and it starts looking at the string from the 0th letter or 0th character and stops at the third to provide an output of NOT. So let's try that here. If we put in 0 and 1, we get D, which is the first character in the string. But going back to the formula description, you'll see that it doesn't actually mention expressions anywhere. That's because we can't use regular expressions with a substring. It simply wants to know the coordinates of the characters you're looking for, which is a very simple method of extracting string from a variable, and therefore might be preferable to using Regex, especially in situations like this one. Before we move on though, let's have a think about the output that we want here. At the beginning of the video, I said I wanted to be able to identify my contact with this ID. So if I have John Doe, and Jane Doe in my contacts, I might want more than just the first letter to give me a clue as to which one I'm dealing with. So let's ask it to output the first two characters instead. So now we have D and O. Perfect. So let's add a separator in before we get on to the next part of the ID, which is the last name. So again, we want to pull up the name property. As you can see, it's outputting the entire name property after the D and the O that we've already pulled from using the substring function, and also after the underscore, which we've put in between the two. To connect all these strings together, we simply use the plus operator, and then in quotation marks, we put in the string for the underscore, and we'll do the same thing when we add the number ID on the end. We know that the only thing we can pass through the substring function is the index or coordinates of the characters, so we'll need to use something a bit different here. The Notion functions that support regular expressions are test, match, replace, and replace all. For this example, we'll use match. So here we can see returns all matches of the regular expression as a list. So that's a clue that regular expressions are probably accepted here. What we want to do is give it a set of circumstances that match the part of the name string of text that we want, which is the last name. Now, there's always a space between a first name and a last name, so that's probably a good place to start, and a perfect use case for regular expressions. Regular expressions are instructions you give to Notion and other coding languages to help it search through a string. Now that can be as simple as giving it exact characters to look for. So, for example, let's type in some exact characters and you'll see that those have been matched and then output here. But what we want isn't quite so defined. So let's start with the space. Now in regex, to look for a space or a white space character, we can use / and S. As we can see, the formula did not fail, but nothing has been returned. So it's obviously recognized the input, but nothing's come out because all it's done is match the white space and output a white space. What we want is everything that comes after the white space. A last name can be made up of any letters though. So how do we tell regex we don't care which character comes next, we just want whatever it is printed? That's where we use a full stop. This is called a wildcard, and it covers any character apart from a new line. So we'll keep the / and the S because we do want it to look for the white space. That's how we know that the last name is starting. But now we'll add a full stop afterwards. We now have an S, which is the next character after the space. So the wildcard has picked up whatever character followed the white space, which in this case was a capital S. We want the entire last name though. Otherwise, we're no closer to getting that specificity in the ID that we were looking for. There are a few regex operators that can say, look at the thing before this, which is the wildcard in this example, and keep finding it until you can't find any more. For us, all the characters after the white space will be the last name. So matching any character after the white space until there are no more characters is exactly what we want. So you can use an asterisk or a plus sign to do this. The asterisk tries to match the thing before the asterisk 0 or more times, while the plus tries to match it 1 or more times. In this example, it's irrelevant which one we use. So we'll just go with the plus. And there we have the last name printed along with the first 2 characters of the first name. Hopefully what this shows is how regex can be useful when looking for specific bits of string in Notion. Before we end the video though, let's finish the ID by simply referencing the ID property we discussed earlier on. So again, we need to add our separator. And then now we reference the ID property. There we go. Hopefully that was a useful intro to regex in Notion 2.0. I would really encourage you to look at the Thomas Frank resource if you want to learn more. And keep a lookout for the full client database template and video coming out soon. If you have any Notion questions and want to reach out, my socials and a link to set up a 30-minute call are all in the description. Thanks for watching.